Welcome to another application video for Intonachino Decorative Venetian Plaster Medium. The medium means that there's a smaller grain size of silica sand, and it also has marble powder mixed in with it as well. There are finer versions, there's also coarser versions. The beautiful thing about having lime mixed with sand is the sand really locks together and creates a really beautiful thick paste that you can work with, as opposed to working with some of our grosso plasters or even the Marmorino matte. The marble grains don't tend to hold the plaster together as nicely as a sand plaster, although the sand doesn't obviously produce the same aesthetic look in terms of like a polished plaster. However, the sand, when you're working with it, it's very easy to use, very easy to spread out. And as you'll see in the final photos as we get through the video, the sand also produces a very cloudy aesthetic and look for your final finishes. So the lime really does dry differently depending on the type of sand grain or the type of marble grain that you have in it. I really like this particular product, and as you'll see by the final photos again, it creates a lot of texture. It's very matte and has a very subtle cloudiness and subtle lights and darks, and that's also produced by the techniques that we're using here, and we'll describe those in the video. The color here is Benjamin Moore Cherry Malt. Cherry Malt has obviously some red tint in there and some black, but most of the medium for these particular products that are quite popular on the market is using a lot of titanium dioxide to get the white pastel colors that are quite popular with designers. So this has a lot of titanium dioxide to create a strong white base and then just a little bit of tint. That's why you see it has a very creamy color, and it also covers very nicely as well. And you're not going to have a lot of harsh lights and darks in your final product. Venetian plaster is actually quite specific to color rather than product. So a lot of designers will think that the product itself will produce a particular look, not taking into consideration the fact that if a color is light or very dark or has a lot of white tint in it as a base, then it will look a lot different. It's not just the product. So for instance, this particular product has a lot of white tint in it, and so you're not going to have strong lights and darks, and you're not going to have a lot of color variation. Now if this was removing all of the white out of it and we only had, say, just a small percentage of a particular red, and it wouldn't be obviously a pastel color, then that tint and the lime itself, you know, you can see through lime quite easily as well. So the tint will tend to pull and create lots of different color variations and lights and darks. And also if you're more in a white color, you'll have much less color variation. And then darker colors, you'll have more color variation as well. So it's not always just about the product. Getting back to this particular install here, we're using our flexible base coat trowels. Again, we have larger ones now that we work with that are part of the Bianco series. They're not up on the site yet. But because this is built into smaller panels, we're choosing to use smaller trowels as well because they're easier to maneuver around. There's some millwork and different things here. Those are some planters. You want to make sure that you mask around all of that, protect everything. We also did one layer of our quartz primer fine interior over all of the different areas here. This is actually all built out of millwork, but everything was glued and screwed together quite nicely. It's for a specifier center as well, so it only needs to last like a year or 2 years. And as you can see, some of the patches there, they used Bondo for all of the different joints and patches, and that's quite a good option as well, as opposed to just using a wood grain filler or something that will crack much more readily. You can't see too easily from this angle, but we'll have some better angles in a minute of how nice this plaster really spreads across the wall. You don't want to leave any lines or ridges or anything. You want to have a nice even layer of plaster, as you'll see in this video. We always edge out, or at least I do. I like to kind of get the hard part done first and do all the edging. You don't need to run your fingers or anything down the edges on the first coat because it will just make a mess and then create an indent there. You just want to use I just use like the regular flexible 6 inches that you can get at any Sherwin-Williams. We'll switch to inox later for, you know, top coats of particular products, but just the regular 6 inch is kind of the best tool. And then we have the flexible base coat trowel there. You can see how this product really sits onto the wall. You can just let it kind of hang there. It's not going to sag off your trowel or sag off the wall or anything like that. The sand really keeps it together nicely. It's probably one of the easiest products that we have to work with, in my opinion. Probably similar to the concrete look medium a lot of people like as well. The mix of the medium with the marble powder and the sand grains seems to be a very nice mixture for people. It doesn't take long once you get the hang of, you know, plastering and how to get it on there without too many lines and what the thickness is. It only takes about 5 minutes to do a panel. It still took a number of days to do this install just because there's so many panels, but in general, if you have just a straight wall, it's not very difficult at all to apply this product. I would strongly recommend a lot of people move towards the Intonachino series first if you're just trying out Venetian plaster for the first time or you're DIY, because it is definitely more forgiving than working with some of the harder products, especially like the Grosso series or even the Marmorino matte is more challenging, I find, than applying this particular product. You always want to start in an area where there's just the quartz primer and work into the plaster itself, and then work away and out over top of the edges there as well for your first coat. You're not going to completely cover that external edge, but you're going to get enough on there so that on your second coat you'll see a different technique and will actually cover over that external. Here we've moved into the second coat now. You can see some of the texture is already applied in behind the TV area there. Ramen again on the second coat is just edging it out, getting that area there kind of filled in. You can, if you want, for these particular areas, run your finger down, but we already did the back portion, and so Ramen had gloves there and he actually ran his finger down all of those already. So now, since that's a finished part and we've run our finger down the internal, your trowel just has to come up to that internal now. You don't have to do anything else. You don't want to run your finger down it again. We've also switched, as you can see, to a different trowel here. This trowel is the Bianco trowel by Pumice. Bianco trowel is a must for any color in any of the Intonachino series. The sand mixed with the lime is very harsh on a steel trowel if it's not a Bianco trowel or the Pavon Anima trowel, because even the inox trowels, the sand is so harsh it will pull very quickly a lot of dark carbon, a lot of black out onto your finished plaster and will completely ruin your finish. The Intonachino and the micro cements are really, really delicate in terms of what particular trowel you can use. The Bianco trowel is a good option. You can also use our plastic trowels or the Pavon Anima trowel. They are expensive options, but you really can't use a regular trowel or even a traditional Venetian plastering trowel, unfortunately, with anything that has sand in it. And then if you have white tint in there as well, it will just make it even worse because the titanium dioxide really brings a lot of black out onto your dark trowel if you're kind of polishing over a plaster that has white in it. Even if you're not polishing, just running your trowel, applying it a couple times will even darken the plaster and ruin it very quickly. So this is why you see us using the Pumice Bianco trowel here. We also were just showing, because of the sand grains, you're going to get more porosity on the first coat, and the second coat you're going to see quite a few pinholes there with the Intonachino series, especially the medium or the the coarse versions. A lot of people like those pinholes. They can be part of your finish. In our particular case, I tend to sponge them out quite a bit, or you just have to go over them a couple times before you do the texture. If you leave those pinholes there and then just texture straight over it, you'll have a bit of a different look. I believe Ramen here doesn't sponge this particular section just because it's small. He just went over it a couple times, put the texture onto it. But you'll see on some of the larger panels, it's really nice to go over those a few times with the trowel, and then also sponge over it too, just to kind of get those out, because once the texture is over top of those pinholes, then you can't get down to them to smooth them out after. You'll always get a few pinholes in any of the plasters, even the Grossello fine. You'll find a few pinholes. You just need to run over them quickly before it dries as you start to burnish the plaster. There you can see Ramen starting to smooth it down and just go over the different areas. Those edges and externals you don't have to worry about too much having build-up on. You can always come back later and smooth over. It's nice to kind of leave it more of like a little clay pattern. Let it set up, become a little clay-like. It can have a jagged appearance, and then you can use your hand or your trowel and slowly kind of smooth it down over those externals. There you can see all the beautiful texture that we have. Oh, he does sponge it here, so that's good. Yeah, the sponging is very important for most plasters, aside from shinier kind of Venetian plasters, or the Grossello series doesn't work great for this. But when you're doing concrete look plasters, micro cement plasters, Intonachino plasters, it's great to put on the plaster a little bit heavier, especially for larger walls and larger sections. Just get it on, don't worry about joint lines or how it looks, and then come back and sponge the whole thing out so it's very even. Take out any joint lines, take out any unevenness, and then take your trowel and start to smooth down the plaster. Start to go over it and polish it and burnish it, or whatever you want to do at that point, and you're going to get a beautiful even wall. If you attack the surface just piece by piece, trying to do it properly, you're going to get a lot of joint lines and a lot of unevenness in your finish. And even when you come back, those sections will be too dry sometimes to burnish or polish if you're on your own. So the sponge is something to really master if you're working in the decorative plaster industry, and knowing when to use it, where to use it, and how to use it to get beautiful finishes. After the product is applied, we go over it, get rid of the pinholes, then we sponge it out smooth. That further smooths the pinholes out and anything else. Then, as you can see here, Ramen starts to apply the texture. We're just putting random kind of parts and pieces there. We're not worried too much about elevations. It's just kind of a messy practice. There's no rhyme or reason to it. His texture will look different to how my texture does as well. But on the whole, when we looked at the wall, you couldn't tell who did what where, but there's always, every person's hand has a little bit of a different technique. So you just put the little added texture there. You can use the face of your trowel. You could also stamp it and create more of like a honeycomb texture. There's lots and lots of different things that you could do here. We just put that texture on like that, smooth it down, and then let it set up until it's firm. You want to let it set up somewhere between 20 minutes to maybe 45 minutes. Come back again with a clean Bianca trowel and slowly kind of burnish and smooth it down. You're not trying to get a really like a shine or anything like that. It's just to compact the plaster down. The Intonachino stays fairly matte, but when you touch it, if you do burnish it properly, it's baby smooth and ultra soft and very, very tactile, and definitely has a different feel to a Venetian plaster for sure. So here's me doing the section here next to the wall. You'll see this get done start to finish. The base coat's all dry there. Even in the base coat, you can see the cloudiness in the modeling, so you're getting lots of different lights and darks with the Intonachino series. You want to run your finger along those edges now on the second coat, because there's actually plaster behind there that helps you dry into something. When you're just trying to run your finger down over the quartz primer, it doesn't have anything to dry into and it just makes an indent. This particular case, you'll properly have the plaster drying into it. You can go around the edges, go around any little difficult areas, and then start applying. And again, we're not trying to make it look beautiful, we're just kind of chucking it on there. We'll come back and sponge it out after. I'm not ultra concerned about the way that it looks here, I'm just putting it on the wall. It's not too thick, it's not too thin, we're not worried about leaving ridges and pinholes and things like that. Just get it on there. Again, we're going away from that external. There'll be enough sitting on there that you'll see me run my hand over it after, and that just kind of smooths down any excess. The reason I'm going that direction is when we did the other side there, I actually went over top of the external, so the opposite direction that you're seeing there, and built up that edge and already kind of smoothed it down and created that. So you have a finished side there, so you want to just kind of go away from it and not try to get any excess onto your new edge there and the finished plaster. See, I'm moving very quickly. You can see it's quite haphazard. There's not a lot of worry about leaving big ridges and lines. If I'm doing very large walls like this, I'll have an even bigger trowel, and I just throw it at the wall pretty much. I leave it very thick. I don't worry too much about what it looks like. You just come back, sponge it all out, and then start to take any excess off and smooth it down and burnish it how you like. And this will really stop you from having unsightly kind of joint lines and different sections of your walls looking different. Very handy technique for doing fireplaces as well, since it's just one small piece and you really don't want a lot of unsightly joint lines on a centerpiece that you're going to be looking at all the time. So here again, we're working quickly, just trying to get it on there. You can see there's lots of lines and ridges. I'm not worried about how it looks at all. There's a little bit of excess there, so we can run our finger down there, run our finger up that external and tidy it up as well. Don't try to do that without gloves on. Having gloves on makes things very easy. So the next step, I like these, I think that is a Mappe sponge, I can't remember, I believe it's a Mappe sponge. You can get them at different tile, high-end kind of tile distribution places that sell a lot of tile mortar and different things like that. They're sometimes hard to find, but they're very dense and they don't have big openings, and they are very, very kind of dense compared to a regular sponge. They don't have any issues smoothing down the plaster and creating a lot of texture. You can see it's quite smooth and it's got a nice tight weave, so it very easily smooths down the plaster. Again, there's no particular technique here. If it's a little more dry and we've got a larger wall, I would use the whole face of the sponge and be able to do more of a circular motion, but because we've just applied that and it's a little thicker, it's quite wet still, so we're just using that to push the plaster into the pinholes, smooth it down, get rid of any lines and ridges, and then we're going to come back. And also the sponging does create a lot of the lights and darks as well, so if you want a lot of lights and darks, you can sponge over the whole wall before you start to burnish, and it will drastically change the way that it looks. You come back again with the Bianca trowel, start to tighten all that up. You can see the different colors and variations already coming into the plaster on the wall there as we just slowly tighten it up. All the different colors are starting to come and form and pull out from just running a trowel over it. I'm not creating them. Just by moving the trowel in different directions and smoothing it down, it will dry the way that it wants to, based on how the first coat did as well. If you do like a thicker first coat, it will look a little different. If it's thinner, it will look different. If it's a little bit more textured, if there's lines in there, all of those things will affect the top coat. So I like to have it spread across, very thin across the whole hawk there, so there's not like a big glob, it's just all spread. And then I just get a little bit, me personally, I like to get it on the whole face of the trowel. And then I use the face, and as you can see, I'm just slowly dragging it haphazardly across the wall there and pushing that plaster out from the face randomly all over there and creating that texture. Many different ways that you can do this as well, but you can just see this is one technique that I chose for this particular style of finish. You don't want to put too much on, just enough to create a little bit of texture. This will further the visual of having a lot more clouds. You don't notice the texture as much. The whole piece just seems like almost like a piece of linen. Again, if you choose different colors for this, it will look very different depending on the color, depending on if it's a white base versus a dark base. If this didn't have titanium dioxide in it, it would be much more varied in terms of color and nuances. Because we've got a white base plaster here with around 8% titanium dioxide, then that is really reducing the ability of the plaster to fully model up. So again, we ran our hand up and down the different sides there. Here's a little bit more of a video of Ramen doing just that one panel there. A little landscape, seeing the rest of it. And here are your final photos of what it looked like when it was all finished and dried. You can see the visual texture, all the different colors and nuances, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. In my opinion, I really like the Intonachino series, and I highly recommend that anyone tries this. A lot of people are just familiar with Venetian plasters or micro cement, but lime and sand is also a beautiful medium to work with. Thank you for watching, and I really hope that you learned something from this video, and we'll continue to make more